The IQ Podcast. Discussion about cybersecurity, business intelligence, consulting, and DevOps. For the domain industry, by the domain industry. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the IQ Podcast. I'm your host, Pinky Brand, and this is episode number 12. There are literally hundreds of top-level domain extensions that offer domain name registration services. And many of these domain extensions are open or unrestricted, meaning they will allow anyone to register available names on a first-come, first-served basis, such as in .com, and many country-specific extensions, such as .co, .uk, or .nu, and in the new domain extensions, such as .shop or .blog. Some extensions only allow organizations that meet certain criteria to register, such as .edu for schools and .gov for the government. And in some country code extensions, the applicant may need to satisfy certain local presence requirements, such as in .eu for the European Union or .ca for Canada. And going beyond these basics, we're all aware of ongoing cybersecurity problems these days. Who hasn't received a suspicious phishing email link that if clicked would end up turning over your personal information or passwords to criminals? Almost no domain extension is completely safe from this and other forms of abuse. And for myself, being in the domain name business, I'm super vigilant when it comes to responding to any communication from my bank or any other financial institutions. I don't want to be that guy that gets taken. But most people are not completely aware of how to protect themselves or what trust signals to look for when doing business online. And so the vast increase in demand for digital products and services, especially as a result of the pandemic, was not lost among the founders of the .bank domain extension. And just as .edu is only for schools and .gov is only for government, .bank is only for verified banks. It's super restricted and has layers of cybersecurity requirements for its registrants. So today, we're going to hear more about the .bank story and how they're making the internet a safer place for banks and their customers. And my guest is Drew Schiff, Director of Engagement Services at fTLD, which is the registry operator for .bank. And welcome to the podcast, Drew.
Thank you so much, Pinky.
Hey, can you share your journey in the domain name world for us and a little bit about the origins of the .bank extension?
Sure. So the .bank domain originated back in 2014, 2015 when all the new TLDs were being opened up for availability. Several of the largest trade associations in the banking industry realized that the .bank and also the .insurance domains really needed to be restricted and protected, that it would be extraordinarily dangerous for the general public to have access to those domains the same way that they do to .com, .co, .net, .org, .biz. So they joined together and came up with a plan to operate the .bank and .insurance domains as communal domains with restrictions on who could purchase domains, how they could be used, what security requirements were necessary to operate the domain, and ultimately want permission to run these .bank and .insurance domains as protected spaces for licensed, authenticated retail banks and insurers.
Yeah. And so in terms of working with the, going through the application process, how long did that take .bank to get ultimately approved and up and running?
Yeah, so that was a laborious process. I guess just generally working with ICANN when there's a lot of interest in the domains. It was a good 2 years of working with both ICANN and cybersecurity experts and industry experts in domains in order to fully develop a process for authentication and verification that everyone agreed would satisfy the requirement of ensuring that they were banks that were getting the domains and provided enough extra protection that when ICANN reviewed what we wanted to do, saw that there was tremendous value above and beyond just releasing them to a private firm that would sell them publicly.
Right. Yeah, that's quite
better
different.
Part of 2 years.
2 years, yeah. It's not a trivial amount of time to get things going, and in this world that we live in, today, As I was saying at the outset, there's a lot of things that have been happening, I think, that have cybersecurity and on the minds of consumers and the financial institutions themselves. Can you elaborate a little bit more
Right.
on the primary benefit of the .bank domain to banks and consumers?
Yeah, and it speaks exactly to how you opened up that the web is full of anonymity. So what .bank does is it allows banks to immediately remove themselves from this anonymous space of the internet where these unrestricted domains .com, .co, .net, .org, where bad actors for $10 or $15 can get a lookalike domain for phishing email attacks, for spoofed websites. And it's these phishing and spoofing attacks that have been the most problematic cyber threat for banks for 3 decades, right? And this is despite our best efforts to educate employees and vendors and customers on how do you recognize what a spoofed email looks like and what a spoofed website looks like. And we've continued to try and educate people for 3 decades, and the problem is as bad now as it ever has been. There's more attacks. The attack vectors are causing more damage, and so I think what we've seen is that ultimately people are either unable or unwilling to do what's necessary to authenticate their engagement with the bank or their engagement inside the bank as potentially a bank employee. So what .bank offers banks is this ability to remove themselves from the anonymous sector of the internet and operate in a verified, restricted space that instantly simplifies the verification process. So a bank employee has a very easy way to ensure that they are not that one click that opens the bank up to malware,
Right.
ransomware, or a breach. That the bank customers have a really easy way to ensure they don't make that one click that opens them to identity theft and financial fraud. There are a multitude of layers of cybersecurity requirements that we require of our banks, of our registrars, and other vendors to add other cybersecurity protections for a multitude of threats. But the biggest win is simplifying a process that has escaped people for 3 decades. People have not been able to protect themselves from phishing and spoofing attacks because it's a moving target, right? They get more and more sophisticated, and people just simply aren't able to defend themselves against them. And what we're seeing is that for the banks that have moved to .bank and eliminated these lookalike domains because they're in a restricted space, it does simplify the process. Their customers are coming back and saying, you know what, I've gotten so used to looking for the .bank in my bank emails to authenticate engagements that I started taking a look at who's sending me emails in my personal life otherwise, and it's actually improved their cybersecurity hygiene outside of banking because they started to realize, oh my God, I was taking a lot of these emails for who they said they were, and it's actually pretty easy to see that they're not if I put the effort in. That's not always the case, right? Some lookalike domains are far harder to detect, and some lookalike domains use modifiers that could also be real. But this simplification process of immediately being able to identify a bank's email or website is by far the biggest win.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find myself, educating my parents, from time to time, and just reminding them, they get phone calls, but they get emails as well, and I'm want to make sure that they're not getting taken advantage of. As I think as many of us don't want our family members to be taken advantage of, but yeah, it does. It's amazing, what's out there, with the spoof domains, and even for myself, again, as I mentioned earlier at the outset, sometimes I have to look at something and go, is this real? Like what is going on here? I know to hover over the link and look at the URL and see what's there and all that sort of thing. Most people just don't, understand that sort of thing.
Right.
A lot of people don't get that. So if I'm a bank, how do I, who within the bank should get involved, in trying to get a .bank domain? Is it the executive team? Is it marketing, security?
Yeah, I think it's ultimately all three at different stages, right? So I think right now what we're encouraging banks to do is that really the C-suite does need to step in temporarily and prioritize this project, prioritize that their marketing and tech teams look into the domain, understand what's involved in making the move, understand what's involved in educating customers. Typically, what we see is that the C-suite it does delegate after that. So once a decision to evaluate and make the move to .bank happens, it becomes a project for the tech and marketing teams to remain involved with. So the tech team would work with their vendors to set up the security requirements, and then obviously the marketing team would work to make the announcement about the move and educate customers. And we have tools and templates for everyone, for the tech team, for the marketing team, to make sure that this is a simple move, that it's seamless for their customers, things like that.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of going back in the days when I was involved with corporate domain name registrars and, making, back then, prior to a .bank extension being around, that perhaps they need to protect their good names in a variety of domain extensions. And so typically you'd have to get involved with the C-suite, but marketing and the tech folks and, whoever handles the name servers and so forth. So, but I can see here, with the layers of security, I mean, you don't, in order to actually become a .bank registrant, what are those requirements? Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go through all of them, just
Yeah, well,
at a basic level.
Yeah, so on the front end, there's the verification process, which is we require that it be a licensed retail bank, and we verify that the bank is in fact a retail bank, that they are licensed, that the person requesting the domain has permission and authority of the bank to do so, and we do that through the C-suite of the bank.
Yeah.
And that ensures that it's not an outgoing employee or somebody who's not even employed by the bank looking to get a domain. And then we verify that the domain they're requesting matches either their name or a trademarked product or slogan. So that's just to get in, and then we repeat those verifications every year for every domain in existence within the .bank space. On the security side, once a bank is looking to use their domain, there's 5 requirements, and 4 are something that I call active requirements, meaning you need to set them up with your vendors. And that's to have your authoritative name servers within the .bank zone. That enables us to see the domain and monitor for compliance with our security requirements. The next is to have DNSSEC in place to secure your DNS against these DNS attacks. Third is to have a TLS certificate in place, and that's what makes a website HTTPS and not just HTTP, so that the communication between a bank customer and a bank is secure and encrypted. The next and final active requirement is for email authentication. And this is, for us, DMARC and SPF. Now, we do suggest that banks also set up DKIM, but we require that they get to DMARC and SPF at a reject level. And what that does is it prevents people from outside of .bank from using your .bank domain against you, right? So at the end of the day, these Hotmail, Yahoo, Gmail accounts that try and pretend that they're coming from Main Street .bank will be disallowed by your DMARC and SPF records. So not only can a bad actor not get a .bank domain in order to send phishing and spoofed emails, but they can't pretend to be a .bank domain from their Gmail, Yahoo, or Hotmail accounts because of DMARC and SPF. The 5th requirement is simply to ensure that you're not using any outdated cipher suites. And so this is a review of the bank's tech stack. They typically work with their core provider and perhaps their website host just to make sure that all their cipher suites and TLS are current, and we provide them with lists of outdated cipher suites that are vulnerable so that they can compare against that list and make sure they're not using any of those ciphers.
That sounds pretty thorough. Would you say with all that going on, is it expensive or complex for the bank to move its for the organization to move its primary URL, to .bank? How does that compare to other security and other initiatives that banks do?
It's definitely the one of the primary concerns that banks have, right, is the complexity, the level of effort that their internal teams are going to have to put, the potential cost. The reality is that it's really straightforward, and it can be done kind of in the background with a lot of other projects at the same time. The best practices that we have allow banks to kind of guide their vendors to do the lion's share of the work. So your registrar is probably going to do about 75% of the work. In most of the banks that are live today, their registrar sets up their name servers, sets up DNSSEC, holds their email authentication records. Their website host will set up the TLS certificate. So typically internally, the only thing that the bank is actually going to do is the email stuff. So they're going to set up email aliases for their .bank address within their .com. They may help work on the SPF and DMARC records to upgrade what they have in .com to prepare it for .bank. But those are really the two things that the bank is going to do. The rest of it is directing their vendors, and we assist with that. On average, banks are spending about $1,500 a year to own a .bank domain and to maintain the security requirements. So the security requirements typically are costing about $500 to set up, and that is often an annual fee with their vendors. So owning and operating a .bank domain and all of its security is typically about $1,500.
Well, that's a drop in a bucket, compared to the potential reputation loss or other security vulnerabilities, that you might have. And it just seems like
and I think that's the key,
expense,
right? That's the key, right? Is looking at it from that perspective. When you look at it as cybersecurity, as defense against these persistent threats, right? We all know how common and how constant phishing attacks are. We know we have banks that come to us and tell us about .com spoofed sites they found. You read about them in the news all the time. When you think about the potential cost both to shut down an attack and to recover from attack, and then the reputational damage that a attack that leads to a breach or ransomware or anything like that would cause, $1,500 a year is nominal. It's nothing. I think when you compare it to the ownership cost of .com, which I think is a trap that initially a lot of banks fall into, is that they realize they spend $10, $20 a year on their .com. $1,500 compared to that is a tremendous jump. But it's looking at it through the lens of cybersecurity, and then you realize this is probably the most affordable cybersecurity you can set up. And it's against some of the most damaging attacks. Right.
Yeah, I think that given all the requirements that a potential registrant has to go through to get a .bank domain, it doesn't seem plausible that someone that has a bank, or whatever they want to call it, that's located on some island somewhere and is just trying to siphon off, people's money, doesn't stand much of a chance of ever getting a .bank domain. Yeah.
No, we do get those, right? We get applications from all over the place, and it's an immediate thing to shut down because we're going straight to the source, of verification to whether or not this bank is licensed by the country it operates in. So it's super easy to check whether or not a bank is legitimately a bank, whether or not the people affiliated with the bank are allowed to do business in the United States. And we get those, right? We get banks that are trying to legitimize themselves. We get crypto plays that are trying to legitimize themselves, and it's very easy for us to separate those out and focus exclusively on retail banks.
Yeah, I would think because there's just an amazing amount of talk, about crypto these days, as you well know, and it just more and more people are aware of it, but are just not really sure of it, and I can see how those players would be trying to muscle their way into this sphere.
Sure.
Yeah. So consumers, being honest, I got involved in the domain business, 25, 26 years ago because I didn't know anything about it. And then I heard about .com, right? I started seeing ads in the newspapers and all that. And as we were talking about earlier, about this migrating away from .com. But the internet has changed a lot, over the years. And I think a lot of us and businesses especially have learned about the potential for fraud and all these sorts of issues. And so I'm starting to notice more. I've even heard it on the radio when I was driving a few weeks ago, and it was an advertisement for a .bank, and I believe it was a San Antonio, Texas-based bank. And I was like, wow, I'm hearing this, on the radio, and I'm also seeing them on a few billboards in and around the Austin area. So I'm just kind of wondering, are you seeing that, consumers are responding to this, or the .bank customers seem to be pleased with the consumer response?
For sure, for sure, and I see the same thing. We see ATMs in airports that are plastered with .bank logos and URLs, and we work with our banks hand in hand to educate their customers. It's the most direct way we have to educate consumers to make sure that they understand what their bank has done, why they've done it, why it's more secure, and for consumers today, right now, the ones that are responding the best are the ones where their bank really does educate, right? The ones that really make a lot of noise and say, hey, we want to make sure, particularly now that you're banking more online, that you're as secure as you can be when you're emailing with us, when you're visiting our website. This is what we've done to protect you. We've moved to .bank. This is what it means. It proves that we're verified. This is what you should look for in your engagements. And when banks do that, when banks truly work to educate through our templates and through the best practices that we provide them, the customer response is really great. They are appreciative of it because it fits right in with everything else that community banks look to be, right? They want to be working for their customers. They want to be supportive. They want to be agile to their customers' needs and demands. And so all the reasons that customers like their banks, particularly their community banks, this fits right in there. This is something they're doing to provide them with top level service. We are in the process now of standing up our own consumer education campaign. So we've introduced it to banks now so that they understand what we're doing and can be participating in it. And early next year, we will start to directly educate customers nationwide about what .bank is and what it means, so that they really do understand that this is something good for their bank to do, something they should be looking for, it's something they could benefit from, and make sure that the banks, as they move, get that love from their customers for the effort that they undertook to protect them. So we'll be rolling that out early next year to directly help the customers understand what .bank is.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a really wise move, because just being in the domain business and kind of talking a little bit more inside domain business now, just a little bit. Obviously you need to go through registrars. Potential registrant needs to go through an accredited registrar in order to register a .bank name, correct? And so.
Correct.
And we all know, I know from experience, and that registrars, while technically able to handle the registration, may not, they have a lot of other businesses and domain extensions that they're dealing with and other services, and may not be able to completely communicate in the value of .bank, to someone arriving at their website.
Right. So it's critical that we kind of do both pieces, right? We need to spend a lot of time educating banks as to what the benefits are and why they should be doing this.
Yeah.
And we have security requirements on our registrars, which is why you tend to see these more niche registrars who do focus on domains that are restricted and have extra requirements and extra effort placed upon them. A lot of the banks haven't necessarily heard of our registrars, and so they have to do their own research, and we'll help them with that to better understand that they work with one of ours because ours have these enhanced security requirements in place as well to help protect the back end of the domain. And that's why they can't go straight to a domain registrar they're used to, right? They can't go yet to GoDaddy or to Network Solutions. They need to register with one of ours. And again, that's because they've got DNSSEC and all these other requirements in place, which help protect the back end and make sure that if somebody were to try and get to their domain through the registrar, that is also protected. So we spend a lot of time educating bankers through the associations, through trade and travel, through online efforts and phone calls. But the new initiative to educate bank customers directly, so that bank customers understand why they're starting to see a movement over to .bank from .com, .co, .net, has been equally important, and it's something that banks have asked for. And previously, we had always supported that through our efforts with banks. So as banks were starting to move, we'd share with them templates for email and website banners and all kinds of things they could use to educate their own customers. But we've reached a point that we think it's really important to educate bank customers at large, so that banks feel a little less intimidated by the potential effort to educate their customers. That if their customers are a little bit more aware what .bank is and what it is, and what that they might want it, that banks will feel more comfortable prioritizing the move if they feel like a larger percentage of their customers know what it is and value its security.
Right, right. Do you think, or actually, I'll ask this, premium names, or can a bank obtain more than one name? So if I'm mega giant bank, I'm a legitimate verified bank, but I also want to own SuperSafe.bank or something like that, can I do that?
So you would have to have some evidence, some additional evidence to support your connection to that, right? So we'll make sure that you've either got a trademark for it or that you've used it significantly in your online branding or in your branding in general. So we do have some banks that use their slogan, more than their own bank name, and they wanted that as their .bank domain. And so they were able to show us trademarks or significant use in their branding to support the connection. But purchasing something that you might one day use that you haven't used yet and have a trademark, no, we do protect against that.
You have to actually use the name. It has to be used within a certain amount of time of registration.
Correct. I mean, there's been cases where trademarks are already filed and they're just waiting on the final approval. And in some cases like that, we can work with a bank to reserve the domain, and they won't be able to use it, but they can purchase it and reserve it. And then when the final approval comes through, we can release it for actual use. But even that would require evidence of having submitted paperwork for the trademark and that things were underway. That way, if it falls through and they don't get the trademark, we can pull it back into the system.
Right.
We don't want domains released to banks that don't have evidence that they're connected to that domain.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. One thing we were talking about a little earlier about abuse and lookalike domains and all that sort of thing. And I know because of our abuse management services that we offer, we see in various top level domains, we will see potential and definitely some threats out there that are using a bank or well-known financial institution's name in this domain name string dot whatever. It could even be a third level domain, bank name dot whatever TLD, right?
Yeah.
And so we see that from time to time. And what other actions do you as a registry take to protect end users from abuse threats beyond what the banks need to be doing? Anything else on top of what you've mentioned already today?
Yeah, really, it's the security requirements on the banks, the security requirements on the registrars and others. We do see everything that happens in the domain. So if there are domains that are being used for mass levels of phishing and things like that, they will ultimately be reported to Spam House and lists like that, and we will see that. And I think in the entire 5-6 years of operation, there's been literally a handful, 5-6 reports of that potentially being the case, and they've all been false alarms. So there's never once been something that legitimately turned out to be true negative disruptive use of a .bank domain. There's been, like I said, a handful of potential that all turned out to be false alarms.
Yeah.
So we do watch for that to make sure that's not happening, and we have other things that are in the works and hopefully will be announced soon that will be, I think, really new to the domain industry for potential security, and we look forward to being able to announce that in the coming year.
Well, we'll have to talk again when you make those announcements, but you've been extraordinarily informative today. And I hope that those that are watching or listening have learned more about what's going on with the .bank domain extension. And if they are interested in registration, there is a URL that will appear on the screen here. And for those of you listening, Drew, why don't you let them know where they can go?
Sure. It's register.bank is the main site for our domain. And there you can find everything from an interactive map that will show every live bank, and we certainly advocate for people to go to that to see who amongst their peers have moved, so that you can have those conversations with with live bankers that have made the move, see what their process was like, see how their customers have received it. Certainly recommend that. We also have a bunch of podcasts with bankers you can listen to, and the application is there as well. So if you go to register.bank, you can find all of that information. You can also email me directly at drew@register.bank. Or even give me a call at 202-339-7000.
I like that. That's the old-fashioned way of contacting people. It works. Drew, thank you so much. Thanks so much for sharing today. I really appreciate your time. And we hope to talk with you again soon and learn more about what else .bank is doing in the future to make the internet safer for everyone. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Stay informed on your domain abuse situation. Get free tailor-made reports at abusestats.com. Do you have feedback or topic ideas? Reach out to us at hello@iq.global. And thanks for listening.